Hello there! Welcome to my review of the Rockford Files Season 1, Episode 21, Just by Accident. Written by Charles Saylor and Eric Calder and directed by Jerry London. This episode begins at a demolition derby, as two competitors get into a particularly heated battle, but end the race as friends, with the winner, Billy Joe Hartman, letting the loser, Dwayne Bailey, know that he's quitting to become a racing driver.
Starting on Monday, I'm doing a dirt track circuit, doing what I want to be doing finally, which is racing.
They also agree to a suspicious-sounding final job.
Don't forget, we got a date tonight.
How am I going to forget? Because it's the last time for that, too.
That night, Bailey fiddles with the fuel gauge so it reads 0 and Hartman gets in to drive the car. It appears they're running an insurance scam where one crashes into the other and claims on the insurance. But with a full tank, Bailey plans to kill Hartman and does so. This is one of those intriguing openings where you know who did what, but you have no idea why. An inverted mystery with a dash of intrigue, and does a fine job of establishing their relationship and what's going on fairly quickly. Sometime later, Hartman's mother contacts her old friend, Jim Rockford, as she has received a life insurance check for $200,000 and doesn't understand where her son got the money to pay for such a policy.
Unless you paid for it.
No, Jim, I didn't. I hadn't seen him for almost 6 months.
She doesn't know much about her son's current life, but on finding a magazine subscription, Jim uses his charm and cunning to get Hartman's current address from the magazine company.
Who is this I'm speaking to? Oh, Miss Johnson. Miss Johnson, this is Mr. Hoffman in Mr. Chandler's office.
The name on the apartment is that of Jeannie Zimzik.
Zimzik. Must be the only one in the book.
Who answers and says she doesn't know Hartman. Jim then goes to see the equally oddly named K. Julian Crum, an insurance agent dealing with Hartman's policy. He says that there is a second beneficiary.
Miss Jeannie Zimzik.
Isn't it pronounced Zimzik?
No, it's definitely pronounced Simzik.
How do you know with a name like that?
Where I come from, that's not a strange name at all. You know, our family's Polish. So Simzik, that's like Smith in this country. No mistake there.
In the opening to this investigation, we get a good sense of more of Jim's modus operandi, and how quick his brain works, as he is able to quickly find a way to get Hartman's address, and rather than just ignore a difference in pronunciation, he's able to divine a clue from it. In writing terms, to get the story from A to B, they could have just had Mrs. Hartman give Jim her son's address. But with this additional step, they showcase his detective prowess, as well as some character development of the relationship between Mrs. Hartman and her son. And it makes the story all the more interesting for it. When he returns to Zimzik's apartment, he's a lot less friendly, but not so unfriendly as to put her off giving him information.
How is it that a man you don't know has his mail sent here? That the same man named you the beneficiary in a $200,000 life insurance policy?
The moment he's gone, Jeannie puts in a call to her employer, letting us know Jim's hunch was right, and that she has been posing as Jeannie for months. This is another writing masterclass, as it gives us vital information that Jim doesn't have, but with no context is actually pretty useless to help us solve it before him. Further developing the intrigue. Also, Jim finds out Hartman had an executive bank account with a safety deposit box, and we find out that Mrs. Hartman runs a construction company.
I know you work hard, but I also know you party hard, too. Monday, I had half a crew up the tower. Not a full crew, half a crew. Oh, hi, Jim.
It's hard to overstate just how ahead of its time the show was when it comes to these small details that challenge gender roles. As we've already seen, a female client of Jim's who was an ace mechanic and race car driver, and now it's just casually dropped in that his current client manages a construction crew. In a choice that these days would be called progressive by some and unrealistic by others, here it's just treated as throwaway, and I think it's wonderfully done. At the bank, they discover that Hartman had $20,000 in cash and 4 driver's licenses in 4 different names. Jim then goes to the police station, and Joe Santos must have been busy because Jim has to deal with returning Sergeant Garvey from the earlier episode, Charlie Harris at Large.
Look, it was an accidental death, case closed.
Your open-mindedness underwhelms me.
I get paid to be objective, not open-minded.
Jim then goes to see Mr. Springfield of Springfield York Insurance, whose name was on the envelopes that the phony licenses were in. But he says he doesn't recognise any of the names Hartman was using, or his face, or at least that's what he claims. As we soon find out, he's the one running the insurance scam with Bailey and wants Rockford bumped off. As we get more clarity on exactly what type of scam was going on and why Hartman was killed, we're also now privy to the planned murder of Jim, once again giving us additional information Jim doesn't have and increasing the tension, which is further amped up as Bailey cold-cocks Jim and then pushes his car off a cliff. Unfortunately for Bailey, he didn't count on the superior build quality of Jim's Firebird and Jim survives.
Hey, you're a very lucky man. That accident should have finished you.
This attempt on Jim's life is a little weak, as Bailey makes no effort to make sure it succeeds and just assumes it does, which, considering how he made sure of Hartman's fatal accident, doesn't make a lot of sense. Even if Rockford's doctor assures us that he was lucky and should have been killed by the accident, it's still not quite enough to sell it. And the whole reason for this escapade is so that Jim will see the doctor fill out a death certificate for someone and further his case by realising how Hartman was able to get his false driver's licenses. In an episode that has skillfully taken us from one clue to another up until this point, this is a little bit clunky and perhaps could have done with another draft, but the episode has been so entertaining up until now, I'm willing to let a little heavy-handedness go. Jim then checks back in with Garvey and finds out the fake licenses all used birth certificates as proof of ID. It's strange to see someone else fill the Dennis role, and while David Spielberg does a great job in the role, it would have been nice to have a few lines explaining where Dennis was and how Garvey is only helping Jim because of how he helped him with the Charlie Harris case. With the information Jim now has about birth and death certificates, he takes a trip to the records office and discovers all the names Hartman was using come from dead people, and that Jeannie Zimzik also is the name of a dead person. He also finds out that birth certificates and death certificates are not cross-referenced, meaning anyone can order the birth certificate of a dead person and nobody would ever pick up on the fact that the person was dead.
Are the dates of death and the birth certificates cross-referenced?
Are you kidding? That would be a monumental task.
This particular plot point is not only still an issue today, even though most records are computerized, but also left Garner distressed when he discovered that a man who used this technique to acquire a fake ID took a bus full of children hostage. Obviously, the incident was not the fault of the show for pointing out this flaw in the system, but it does explain why certain myths continue to be perpetuated in crime shows. Not just because of audience expectation, but also to not reveal how easy it is to commit certain criminal acts. We then get a very funny scene when Jim checks the names he has with Crumb, much to the annoyance of a woman waiting to place a bet, and he steals her tip in the process. It's a lovely combination of characterization as well as furthering the plot, as we get to see just how unscrupulous he can be in the right circumstances.
20 on the nose. Right, Jack. Later. Hold on, I'll be right with you. Just a minute.
Jim does find out that the Springfield York insurance firm handled all the claims from all the people Hartman was pretending to be, and then finds out that Springfield is at the racetrack. Except he's not, and it's a trap. When Jim gets there, he's set upon by Bailey and then Springfield. Although, not being too experienced in the murder game, they don't make a great job of it. Although they do kill his on-loan car, just before the cops arrive and arrest them both. In the epilogue, Jim fills Garvey in on what the scam was, and also finds out that Mrs. Hartman paid for the damage on his car and the loaner. This is yet another great episode, and I really don't get bored of saying how good this show is. It's not perfect, as I mentioned, but it's got a good plot and some really strong characters, with enough incidental characters to make it feel authentic. Garvey isn't a bad replacement for Dennis, although I'm glad he wasn't a permanent replacement. And Mrs. Hartman is a fantastically well-developed character for the amount of screen time that she has, being such a good sport about everything, and for once not leaving Jim out of pocket. It's a shame we don't see her again, as she's another great character that leaves you wanting more. This is one of the few episodes with none of the regular supporting cast, so it's a real triumph of storytelling that you don't really miss them. Despite my issues with some parts of this episode, this is still a 5 out of 5 for me. Thank you. Goodbye.